Good afternoon, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm speaking to many people who, like me, are committed to delivering the energy transition. My name is Fleming, and I am leading Hitachi Energy in the UK and Ireland. And as a critical supplier of transmission, technology and solutions, we are at the heart of the biggest infrastructure transformation that we're seeing in a generation. Energy really is the backbone of creating better connected places, powering homes, transport, businesses, and communities in a way that is smart, efficient, and inclusive. And whether it's enabling clean transport, infrastructure, ensuring industrial hubs have access to reliable energy, or making sure every home, regardless of its location, can benefit from affordable, low carbon power. And in essence, this is about connecting people to opportunity through energy, transport, and technology. And really just to take a step back, because the energy transition started because it was the right thing to do for a very long time. The shift to clean energy has, for a long time, been about fighting for a sustainable future. However, today, there is an even bigger driver, and that is around, security and energy security particularly. Because as we have seen with the start of the Ukraine war, and also particularly over the last 6 weeks, the world has really changed. And the risk to global energy supply chains are clearer than ever. And the UK actually is now taking decisive action to build an energy system that is not only clean, but also resilient and independent. A homegrown, renewables-based system reduces our reliance on imported fuels, shields consumers from price volatility, and ensures that energy is available where and when it is needed. So now that all sounds like a great thing. But really, the way that we now generate and use electricity is being turned on its head. We are moving from a system in the UK of large, stable, predictable generators located near demand to one where power is generated, actually where the wind blows the strongest, and like today, the sun shines it at its absolute best. And this shift presents huge challenges. Renewables are less predictable, they require infrastructure, and that brings new connection challenges. But they are also the cheapest, most secure, and most sustainable form of energy that we have. So now the focus must really be on delivering a network that enables rather than delays this transition. And maybe just to give you a bit of an idea in terms of the investment that is needed, that is so unprecedented. The National Energy System Operator, a few months ago, published a plan called the Clean Power 2030 plan. And in it, it set out how, in order to reach 2030 targets, we require 120 gigawatts of new generation. And maybe just to give you an idea in terms of what that means, it means 3 times the amount of offshore wind that we have installed today, plus doubling the amount of onshore wind, plus 3 times the amount of solar capacity. And in order to balance a lot of that out, we'll also be requiring 5 times the amount of currently installed battery energy storage systems. And to build this massive amount of new generation, it will require a network that is going to be moving all of these electrons around the country at a place where we need them, and at a time that we need to use them as well. And this requires a huge amount of investment. In fact, NESO has estimated this requires £48 billion worth of investment in terms of new generation as well as new transmission and distribution. And let me be clear, this is £48 billion per year. And if we just look at the transmission and the connection piece in that, that will be £15 billion per year in order to strengthen and to secure the grid and provide connections to offshore wind farms. If you want to think about what this looks like from a physical point of view, this will be roughly 4,000 miles of new network links, 2,500 of which will be offshore. It's really quite mind-boggling. But really, to be able to achieve this, we see a number of changes that are going to enable and take some of the roadblocks that have been moved out of the way. For example, we've seen proposals from Ofgem to allow some flexibility in procurement, in transmission, through the advanced procurement mechanisms. Last week, we saw some announcements around the long-awaited planning reforms to help and speed up delivery. Critically, we have also seen the plans, and hopefully they should be finalized in the next few weeks, on the reallocation of grid connections, and really ensuring that critical projects can be connected on time and stop zombie projects from blocking our queues. This staggering transformation has just happened in a few years, and while Clean Power 2030 is a challenging target, it really provides a clear direction. And while the focus until 2030 is a lot on securing and investing in improving the transmission grid, I'm actually much more excited in terms of what actually this transformation is actually enabling. Because the grid of 2030 is not just about integrating new renewables, it's really preparing for widespread electrification. And as we enter that new era, the changes on the demand side will actually be even bigger than the changes that we're now seeing on the generation side. The way that we will be consuming electricity is becoming much more dynamic, with the increase of EVs, heat pumps, smart appliances, and how they will interact with the grid, creating highly flexible and bi-directional energy systems. The distribution networks must evolve to handle variable generation, but also shifting consumer behavior, moving away from a traditional one-way flow of electricity to a system where power is generated, stored, and used at the local level. And then we also have the issue of, or the opportunity of data centers and artificial intelligence, really driving massive new electricity demand. The rise of AI and high-performance computing means data centers are consuming huge amounts of electricity, and this will only increase. But it also provides the opportunity to develop new solutions to integrate these data centers into the energy system, also leveraging the flexibility that they can provide, improving efficiencies, but even repurposing some of the waste heat that they create. And then, of course, there's digitalization, automation, and smarter flexibility in the markets, to ensure that networks can cope with the changes without unnecessary over-investment and infrastructure. And to make all of this work efficiently, we need smarter planning. And therefore, I'm really pleased, and having advocated for actually strategic planning for a very long time, that by 2027, we will actually start seeing regional energy strategic plans, or RESPs, just to add to all of the acronyms that we're working with on a day-to-day. And what that is really doing is linking local energy needs with transport, industries, and homes, and really to optimize the infrastructure development. So despite all of this momentum, which is great, and the changes that we've seen over the last couple of years, and particularly since last summer, have been absolutely dramatic, some challenges remain, because we're really on a very, very tight timeline. The scale-up of skills, supply chain, and infrastructure all have to happen in parallel. And this will require unprecedented collaboration. As we heard in the previous session here as well, collaboration is really the key to making things happen. So this includes the city regions, the cities, transmission and distribution companies, of course the supply chain, the government and the regulators, all of us working together in order to make that happen. So as I said, the energy transition is not just about the power system. Actually, we forget about that quite a lot of the time. To me, it is really about creating fair access to create a sustainable energy future for all. And everyone in this room has got a role to play. We all own the energy transition, and it is through our collective effort that we will succeed. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to discussing some of these challenges in the panel. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're hopefully going to have a bit of a Q&A and then perhaps some audience participation around challenges, which will be easy, solutions which will be harder related to the energy transition. I'm going to be facilitating the session. For those of you that are hoping to encounter my colleague Duncan Mears, Duncan sends his apologies. Those of you that have seen his photograph in the conference materials will already realize that I'm quite a significant upgrade to Duncan. I have my own hair, my own teeth, and all sorts of functionality that Duncan has lost, if indeed he ever had them. In terms of this session, I guess my claim to fame is that I was responsible within Hitachi for the Optimized Prime program. I see one or two of my colleagues in the audience also smirking because they had leading roles in the program, but I get to claim most of the glory for that one. Optimized Prime, if you are not familiar with it, apart from having the coolest name in history of programs ever, was the largest trial of commercial electric vehicles where we ran, I think, about 8,000 vehicles in the end to try to gather data, to help us analyze how the vehicles were behaving with respect to charging, to try to kind of accelerate the transition to EVs. If you're interested in learning more, you can just Google Optimized Prime. Other search engines are available, and you'll see all the reports that were done. There's even the entire data set if you just want to rerun all the work that we did over 4 years for your own satisfaction. So that's me and where I fit in. Laura, you've heard from. Is there anything you want to add by way of introduction, Laura? Just in the spirit of gallantry?
Well, I think I already did. But
you
anyway,
did?
Laura Fleming. I'm the country managing director responsible for Hitachi Energy in UK and Ireland.
Splendid. James.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I am James Graham, not the James Graham in the photograph on the slide. I don't know who he is, but I am...
Not as good looking in my view.
Well, very kind of you, Martin. So I'm the Chief Executive of Equans Digital Energy Services. So we are part of the WEES Group, a strategic supply to government. The business I lead provides a number of services and solutions to help businesses deliver both the energy and digital transition, as the name suggests. That covers things from renewable generation. So we are deploying and building over 500 megawatts of solar each year, about a couple of gig in the pipeline. We also have an active role in the hydrogen economy, both the HAR1 and HAR2 rounds in terms of EPC delivery, EV charging, but we also deliver smart building technology, so helping optimise consumption in building through intelligent building control systems alongside some consulting, so cover a breadth of different topics that are relevant to today's discussion.
Super, thank you. Mark.
I'm Mark Wray, so I'm the Director of Maritime and Ports at the Connected Places Catapult. So we're responsible for the summit, so apologies, James, that we've got the wrong photograph. I'm sure the guys will be able to sort that for the final app, but yeah, apologies for that. They must have got it off of LinkedIn, I guess. I have you've got a good doppelganger.
Yeah.
So that's me. I look after all of our interests in maritime and ports as part of our connected transport program.
Excellent, thank you. So the way it's going to work is I've got a specific question for each one of the panelists. I've then got some more general questions to try to catch them out, if I can. But I think there's also an iPad here, which I should probably have in my sweaty hand, because this is how I capture questions from the audience, if there are any. Or indeed, there's a gentleman at the back waving a microphone, so if you don't fancy all the iPad stuff, you can just ask for the mic, and we'll try to field the questions as best we can. So I'm going to come to you, Laura, first. So from your introductory comments, it was reasonably clear that the energy system's becoming more complex, more distributed, more weather dependent in many respects. And notwithstanding people's efforts to, if you like, manage energy demand, nonetheless, sectors like transport, heavy industry are demanding more and more energy. So what do you think are the challenges for keeping that kind of system in balance? And perhaps more importantly, from a grid operator perspective, what are the answers, or at least some of the answers they should be investigating?
Yeah, sure. No, and thank you for the question. And absolutely, it's becoming more, it's becoming more challenging, much more complex, but also a lot less predictable than the system that we've been operating over the last, 60 years or so. And there's also a huge variability throughout the day, but for example, also throughout the year in terms of the demand and the supply that we'll be seeing. So the system, and as I said earlier, it really needs to be more resilient and it needs to be more digitized. So one of the issues, just to give a couple of examples, is around renewables. Maybe the wind is not always blowing at the rate that we need it, or sometimes actually we have too much wind and we're generating more power than we need. How do we work on a system that can store the energy when we produce that we don't need, so that we can use it at a later time? But also, how can we make sure that we have a system when usually in the beginning of January we have this lovely 2 weeks of nice sunny weather and absolutely no wind? And a much more integrated system is really what the transmission owners are working on, that will allow them to manage these different flows of generation and demand that are coming through the system. So one way of doing that is by including storage, whether this is battery energy storage for short duration storage, or long-term duration storage, for example, through hydropower, to create a system that can react very quickly but very succinctly to the changing power flows in the system. One of the other ways is, for example, through interconnectors. Because generally speaking, when we're looking across Europe, there will always be somewhere where it's either very sunny or very windy, or we can rely on the amount of hydropower stored up in the system somewhere. So it's that trading between countries that's going to be increasingly important in order to create security for the UK as well.
I got a supplementary, if I may.
Yes.
So are we fundamentally talking about the existing grid, which is souped up with software and better data, or is it a new grid that we need fundamentally to help manage these solutions?
Well, I would actually say it's both, right? So it's actually an extension of the grid that we have at the moment, and we augment that, as you say, with additional physical infrastructure. But also we need to really learn and collect the data to understand actually, what is going on, what is it that we need, and when do we expect we will need that? And this is where I think the power of data collection and the power of AI are really going to help us in the future to be able to better predict in terms of what is coming, to be able to predict actually what the weather pattern is going to be. So we know that we need the interconnectors to be there and to be ready. So we can be much more precise, but also making sure that we don't throw any energy away that we're producing, and also that we actually don't end up with a system that is far too large. So on the whole, the system that we have got just now is made and built actually on the basis that, as long as we have more than what we need, we're always going to be okay. And I think if we can use the digital tools that we have right now, or the digital tools that we'll be developing in the future, will be able to help us to actually have a much more closely balanced system.
Very good. Thank you very much. James, I'm going to come to you next. It's a related a question, but a slightly different spin, as it were. So net zero has always been quite a complicated concept to grasp in the first instance. And it's becoming a little bit more complicated rather than less, in the sense that politically some reasonably significant political entities are showing something of a disinclination to grasp the idea of net zero. And it's also the case that, irrespective of ideology, many public sector and private sector organisations are finding it, the inevitable focus on short-term financial results compromise some of the things they might want to do longer term that would be more consistent perhaps with net zero. So how do you think businesses and governmental organisations should try to manage their way towards net zero in that climate?
There's a really short answer, which is with great difficulty. So I'll try and give you a slightly longer one.
Thank you.
So I think kind of in preparing for this session today, I was kind of thinking the answer would have been very different 6 months ago, perhaps. But I think it's common knowledge, clearly, what we're seeing over in the US with Trumponomics, with the slight hesitancy around net zero. But that's also really feeding itself into the UK environment too. And that's not only just in terms of hesitancy from a government policy perspective, and I think that people before me spoke about Kemi Badenoch's speech yesterday, whether net zero is in fact achievable, but more importantly, is it affordable? I think, challenges around bankruptcy of the UK and that kind of extreme language is used. But actually, is the technology available for us to deliver that? And again, to something Laura talked about, resilience, do we have the capability to deliver it in the UK? But that's then manifesting itself in business decisions. So BP clearly moving away from some of their green commitments because actually the share price isn't performing as well as it can be. So I think what we're seeing is that hesitancy from industry and now government in a space where politically is the finance available? Is it performing? So I guess the first question is it optional to aim for net zero? And I suppose we're probably all in this room not climate skeptics. We're here because we believe in climate change. So I think the short answer is no, it's not optional. But even if you felt it was, it's clear that everyone is battling now the physical impacts of climate change. So whether that's increased heat impacting how assets perform, whether that's spontaneous combustion in London or actually patients recovering in hospital, how the grid performs in outages and the energy demands that we have, or whether that's other physical impacts that you're seeing when running your assets that are impacting whether businesses can actually deliver their services. So we're seeing that big challenge around interruption of business through climate change and impacts on operation and profitability. So I think the answer is that the businesses and government have to find a way to deliver it regardless of their views on policy, because if they don't, the physical impacts will impact their services. And so what do? I suppose that then takes you to the challenge that actually some of the large-scale upstream grid decarbonisation that Laura talked about is well established, but not perfect. For example, we've got a number of solar farms that are built, completed, but are awaiting grid connection. So you've got stranded assets and stranded finance. That's not good to encourage continued investment, and that creates a level of drag. And actually, I think an area that needs some focus is how we make that, how we unlock that. And I know that there are government plans to do so, but for that capital that's tied up and not yet repaying itself, it's a long time to wait. But I think there is something perhaps that we can think about in terms of, I suppose, the downstream decarbonisation, what we do within the built environment. And that's where I suppose the technology comes in around some of the demand management, and we can start to use building control systems, intelligent building control systems and battery storage to think about how we use and flex our demand to take pressure off the grid as we try to make up some of the ground that we've not yet made in terms of delivering decarbonisation. I think then we start to talk about AI, and everyone loves to talk about artificial intelligence, but actually using that data across our built environment to understand consumption patterns is going to help us unlock a rapid acceleration to decarbonisation that costs us less and it has quicker return on investment.
I understand, thank you. You mentioned BP, and it's very interesting, isn't it, that they've been so transparent in a change of strategy, which is not to abandon some of the things they were doing, but certainly to redimension the priorities, as it were. How do you read that? Is that simply BP becoming more realistic in its marketing language, or is there something more afoot there?
I think there's two things. I think if you read some of the articles, there's a focus on share price. So their share price wasn't performing as well, and perhaps I think the political climate created in the States and other policies meant it's now actually acceptable to come off the fence and say, I'm going to focus on what I perceive to be a quicker return on investment. And so I think it's down to industry to help drive that change with governance, that actually delivering low carbon and green solutions is the right economic decision. I think a lot of industries baked that investment in already, and I think the technology's there and is going to come regardless. I think if companies like BP choose not to prioritise it and focus, they'll probably find themselves behind the curve in 5 to 10 years' time.
Understand. Thank you. Mark, I'm going to come to you now. I've spent a little bit of time in the maritime sector myself, enough to realise that it's a whole other world, as it were, at sea. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that the decarbonisation of the marine sector will pose that are kind of specific to marine, as it were, and what some of the solutions might be to kind of bridge the gap, particularly if there are technology solutions that can help this transition?
Sure, absolutely. No, one of the benefits of working in the maritime sector, and I've been in there for a while now, is that it is a global industry. So therefore it's isolated to a degree from some of the vagaries of local governments and some of the Trump factors, for example. And it was interesting spending time with several of the American ports last year who said it doesn't really matter what he says, we will carry on because it's part of a global picture, and there is so much momentum there to move towards decarbonisation. The challenge, of course, then is that you are now taking an awful lot of parties forward, so there are multiple options and multiple pathways to follow within the sector. The sector hasn't decided upon a singular energy source or singular solution because it has so many different demands in terms of use of its equipment. So therefore, it's going to face a multi-fuel future, which includes everything from wind assist, and we at the Catapult are part of a number of projects developing and reimagining what wind assist technology looks like. It's also going to use a whole series, it's going to use electrification, and electrification is well suited for shorter duration journeys, so 100 nautical miles or so is about the limit of the current technology. That will improve as battery technology improves, so we could go to slightly further distances. But certainly when it comes to deep ocean travel, and of course which is where the majority of our global trade and our global maritime movement occurs, then that's going to be looking at some form of replacement fuel. And the front runners in there are hydrogen-derived fuels, particularly, certainly there seems to be a coalescence of experts moving towards ammonia as being the fuel of choice, which has a whole load of challenges to it about how do you generate the amount that we need and the sort of investment. We're talking about globally around about a $2 trillion investment over the next 25 years, of which we need 400 billion in the next 5 years. Bringing it closer to home here in the UK, we're looking at about a £70 billion investment in there. So $2 trillion, just to give you an example, that's the GDP of Canada or South Korea. £70 billion is around about what we spend on the NHS over 2 years. So they are sizable investment funds, huge numbers of people to mobilise, and some pretty tough technical challenges around handling new fuels, new energy, where we don't have the proliferation we'll need of the skills in those ones. So those are key challenges. The solution, certainly in the short term, comes back to data. It's about understanding the demands, understanding where the supply chain is, and marrying up those demands and supply chains to draw the investment in when we need it for those solutions. And that's really complex because that data is very widely spread. So it's a big data problem, a big data challenge, solvable of course, but and AI will definitely have a part to play within that. But those are some of the big challenges.
There was a collision in the North Sea, rather unfortunately, recently that made the news headlines.
Yes.
Jolly unlucky, actually. What are the chances? But nonetheless, does that tell us anything about the maritime industry and its preparedness to deal with some of this? Because it seems that some of the activity that takes place out at sea is somewhat undermanaged. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
Depends on your point of view about the chances of that happening when you look at the nationality of the captain of one of those, but that's a whole different discussion, perhaps for later. But yeah, I mean, we don't have particularly good tracking data. We're heavily reliant upon a system which is not effective for the sort of future we're going to need. And certainly if we're going to move towards an era of autonomy, and autonomy presents great opportunities to reduce down the occurrence of such events happening, and of course drives huge efficiency gains, we're going to need a whole different sort of precision navigation and timing solutions, which not being part of Europe does cause us a challenge in that we need to be thinking about our own here.
Understand, thank you. I've learned a number of things being on stage. Thank you to the content from the individual speakers. I've learned there's a lady at the back with a large sign saying stop, and I do take a hint eventually. I've also learned that I can't work the iPad. So if there is anybody who's got a burning question that they want to make use of the microphone for, there is one. First come, first served. But we're going to take a question from the gentleman here. If you wait for the mic, tell us your name, and if it's a general question or aimed at one person in specific, and then having had lots of food for thought, there is actual food, which is at least as satisfying. Sir.
Hi, name's Neil Edrich. I'm from a systems engineering consultancy. It's a general question for the panel, given that there's the demand issue in that 91% of last year we were a net importer of electricity through the interconnectors, and also the capacity management on renewables. That spend has gone up tenfold since 2017. So we clearly have more need of a stable, predictable baseload. Particularly given Hitachi's placing in the SMR race, whether there's a view of new nuclear and SMR as a part of that energy mix to provide that sort of transition.
Maybe I can give a very brief sort of answer on that. So I think what we'll see until the 2030s is the increase, obviously, of more renewables, but absolutely beyond the 2030s, we need much more storage, much more flexibility, and I think nuclear has definitely got a role to play in that as well.
Mark, did you want to?
The UK certainly does not have the capability to produce enough energy to service our maritime sector, and we also run the risk of losing out on the trade war in that those vessels will move to where there are fuel. So we do need to be importing fuel, and that fuel is probably going to come from the southern hemisphere. So we need to think about how we're going to bring it in. Specifically on nuclear, I do believe that SMR reactors do have a point to play. I personally live only 5 miles from 13 nuclear reactors sat inside vessels inside the dockyard. So nuclear definitely has a part to play, but it is, of course, extremely complex. We certainly need more systems engineers out there to bring these complex systems together. And of course, we have a huge journey to go on in terms of bringing along the public and our elected officials with us if we're going to start proliferating small nuclear reactors, because I had a go at that about 10 years ago. And yeah, it was pretty lively.
Very good. Listen, thank you. I'm told that the next step for the lady with the red sign is to come and bash me over the head with it. So we're going to wrap up there. But I would like to thank Laura, Mark, and James. Thank you all for your attention, and enjoy lunch when you get to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.